Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm gonna take you on a little journey with me where I try oil paints for the first time. I have never tried oil paints. I think I might have back in high school, but I don't remember the experience, so I have no idea what that was like. But I never tried oils. They always seemed a little bit intimidating to me because they don't dry right away, and I have never had to deal with that. All my paints, acrylics, watercolors, gouaches, they all dry within, a few minutes. So you can do another layer and then another layer, and you can finish a painting in one day without worrying about drying times and layering and all that kind of stuff. But with oils, you really can't do that. You have to wait or do something else with it. But you basically have to just give it a long time. And I know this because my fiance, Sean, is an oil painter and other acrylics too as well. But he does a lot of paintings with oils. And so I see him painting one day and then he has to wait like a week for the first layer to dry, and then he paints again, and then he waits another week, and it takes weeks for a painting to be fully dry and to touch and all that stuff. And I just can't it's really difficult for me to understand that. So I figured I'll give it a try. I had some cheap oil paints that I bought. I think it's the Reeves brand. I bought at Michael's a while ago to try, and I haven't tried it, so they've just been sitting there. So I pulled those out to try, but as it turns out, some of them were really dried up and just wouldn't even come out of the tube. So I did steal some of his paints and just tried it out with his paints. I think he's got Winsor Newton and some other brand. But I decided to do this one with just my palette knife, so I'm not using any brushes or anything like that. I figured this will be a quick impressionistic take on the Monstera leaf, which is still my theme for January. So I just jumped in, I grabbed my little tiny palette knife over here and a little canvas board. I think it's about 4x6, maybe 5x7. It's a very little one. So it's just a mini little painting. I didn't want to waste a big one because, like I said, this is my first time, so I didn't know what to expect. I did really like doing this background right here, this beige color, because I was able to just go back into areas like I'm doing right here. I just could go back and add a little bit of yellow and not have to do another layer and all that, because the paint was obviously still wet, so I could just go back in and remix it and move it around and stuff and get a different texture going. So that part I really enjoyed. I think in the long run I might try this again. I didn't love it. It was very challenging. My brain just couldn't adjust to the fact that the paint was still wet. Like, I kept trying to go over certain areas at times, and then I'm like, oh no, it's lifting up the paint because it's still wet on the bottom. So it takes a lot of adjusting for my brain to do. I think I might have to do this a few times for me to just like realize and understand all the time that the paint doesn't dry, or just break it up into chunks. So do a little bit every day or every few days, which will give the paint time to dry. But I try to do a painting in one day when they're just tiny. So I figured I'll finish this in one day, and I don't care how it turns out because obviously this is my first time, so who cares, right? So like right here, I started mixing the green into the leaf, and every time I touched one of the sides with the beige color, it would lift the beige color and then bring it into the leaf, and that really bugged me. Like, I don't really care. It just adds to the kind of impressionistic look to it, all the colors mixing and all that. So it looks really nice, but it was a little bit annoying because I didn't want it to happen, and then it kept happening. And so yeah, I think in the long run I'll break it up into separate days, or I don't know, try different techniques. I'll ask my fiance, have him help me a little bit, because this was very challenging. Also, I think next time I'll do something with brushes, because as you can see, this one is just very thick. It's just like gooped up on there, and it's a very quick kind of abstract-y way of painting. I didn't really use a brush. I used a little bit right there to fill in that little leaf because it was really tiny, but for the most part I don't use a brush at all in this painting, and I feel like I need to try at least one more time with oils and a brush. So you will see me do it again. Maybe I'll do one next month when I have time, because this is really, I feel like I'm wasting my time when I try out new tools, because sometimes I end up hating them and then I'm like, ugh, I just wasted 2 hours on this and I didn't enjoy myself. I just hated the whole process, and now I can't get those 2 hours back. But then there's been other times where I tried new tools and actually really liked them, so you never know. But we'll see. I will come back to oils again and try them out, especially now that I've already tried it, so they're not too bad. But again, I prefer my watercolors and my gouaches and my acrylics. So for a paint that really doesn't dry a lot, those Reeves tiny little student grade oil paints, they did dry out. I had a few colors that the greens especially, I couldn't get out of the tubes at all. I squeezed super hard. The tube didn't seem very firm, but it just wouldn't come out. So that's why I used Sean's paints, because these Reeves ones just for some reason dried up, and you would think oil paints don't dry up. I mean, Sean has paints that are like 20 years old and they still come out of the tube perfectly fine, and these Reeves ones just didn't. But that's what you get for buying super cheap oil paints. So if you're trying out new paints, Reeves are fine, but don't let them sit for 2 years unopened, because they will dry out. So this is where I get a little bit messy. I started adding too many colors, mixing too much, and it turned out like, ugh, I don't like what I did right here, because it just looks super muddy. I lost my beautiful texture that I was working on. I lost the beautiful like colors, and I just really didn't like what I did right here. So I tried to undo it, and I tried adding some yellows to bring back the contrast a little bit in the leaves and stuff, because they just kind of turned out teal and flat and weird. So it got a little bit messy, but I saved it a little bit at the end. I added some white highlights and stuff, and it didn't turn out too bad. Another reason maybe I didn't like this, because it was such a small canvas, and I am using a small palette knife, but still it is a little bit big, because the canvas, like I said, it's really tiny. So it was very difficult to kind of maneuver the knife around and try to get into little spots and get some of the little, not really details, but some of the areas were just a little bit hard to reach and kind of just paint, because the knife was so big. So I'm just adding some really white highlights here, and again, I couldn't get them so white because they kept mixing with the paint underneath and it just kept bugging me. But I managed to get them in there, so at least they're in and it's done and finished, and I can move on and I can say that I have tried oil paints. So I will be trying them again next time with a brush and maybe some other subject. Maybe a landscape will be easier. Alright guys, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more videos of me painting and some more lettering tips coming soon. Alright, see you next week. Bye!